This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Jamie Nodder. Jamie Nodder is the co-founder of WorkXO, an organization committed to doing whatever it takes to upgrade the operating system of this thing we call work. He is the co-author of the books When Millennials Take Over the World, Preparing for the Ridiculously Optimistic Future of Business, and Humanize, How People-Centric Organizations Succeed in a Social World. In addition to being an author and co-founder, Jamie has worked as a consultant, speaker, and trainer in the fields of international conflict resolution, ethics, diversity, and working through difficult conversations. Jamie found that regardless of the issues, it comes back to organizational culture. Jamie carries a master's degree in conflict resolution from George Mason University and a certificate in organizational development from Georgetown, where he serves as adjunct faculty. Welcome, Jamie, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
As you know, we usually start our podcast with a couple of quirky questions to get to know our interviewees a little better before we get started. So my first quirky question for you is, what is your guilty pleasure television show?
Guilty pleasure television show. Yeah. I actually don't watch a lot of TV in general, but the one that I am now stuck on is Bar Rescue.
Bar Rescue, like the one where they come in and tell people how to run
redo a bar, and it is so staged. It is so obvious. It's so lame, but I can't help it. I watch it every time, and I want to see what happens. And if they listen to his advice, it's like I'm sucked right in. I don't know why. I've decided that if once my business sells for $1 gazillion, I'm going to go become a bartender. That's my plan. And so now I'm getting the inside scoop. But I do like that show, even though it's predictable.
That's funny. So it's not because you've been a bartender or anything in your past life?
No experience in the food industry at all. But I do love watching that show.
Very cool. Very cool. All righty. Well, the second quirky question is, what is your favorite possession?
Favorite possession is definitely my bicycle. I ride a lot. I'm about 1,500 miles a year.
Wow.
These days, despite my pushing 50 years old, I'm still doing that. And I won a dream bike in a raffle.
So what kind of bike do you have?
It's a Linsky titanium road bike. And there's no way I could have afforded it. So that makes it even more special. And it's titanium, so it's going to last forever. I can sort of it's as light as carbon, but doesn't break. So today, tomorrow is supposed to be really warm and sunny and dry for the first time around here in a long time, and I'm going to go riding. So I'm very excited.
How many miles will you put in tomorrow?
Tomorrow I will probably do between 30 and 50. That's what we do on the weekends.
Very nice, very nice. My husband and I have done a bicycle ride across Georgia. Have you heard of that kind of? It's. Other states have them too, but yeah.
I've never done one. I've done some long rides, but not one of those.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. We come from Iowa, and Ragbri is huge in Iowa.
I've heard all about that. Yeah, I've never done that either, but I've heard about it.
All right, so now you've got to put that on your bucket list somewhere.
It's true. It's true. I will say the one ride that I've done, I did it 10 years in a row, but we would ride from Pittsburgh back to D.C.
Oh, wow.
In 4 days, and it was all on trails, so you were never on the roads.
That's
or
nice.
Almost never. It's kind of fun. But.
Very cool. Very cool. Excellent. All right. And now for a little bit different change of pace here. So what's your story? What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about upgrading the operating system that we call work, which I love that tagline, by the way.
Yeah, no, thank you. My story starts really in the field of conflict resolution and the field of, originally my master's degree, as you mentioned, is in conflict resolution, but my first job outside of after my master's degree was for a small nonprofit doing international ethnic conflict resolution. And so I was doing work on the island of Cyprus. And for those of you out there that don't know Cyprus, there are Greek Cypriots and there are Turkish Cypriots on the island. It's a very small island, about 1 million people, and they haven't been getting along for the last several centuries. And I got to go there and do work with folks who were like deeply enmeshed and in the conflict. And one of the big epiphanies in that process is realizing that it's a system. And you can have the right answer and still not make it work if you don't change the system in ways that are not always obvious. And this was, I don't know, I don't even want to say how many years ago this was, but this was in the early 90s. And today I'm doing the exact same work. Like figuring out early on that it's about changing the system was just, that set me down this whole path. And so I ended up moving out of the conflict resolution field. I was doing some diversity training. I became a management consultant. I called my work a lot of stuff, but in the end, it's making the right change at the right place in the system to get the new result. And so all of my work boils down to that now.
All right, so I got to ask more questions.
Okay.
So what does that mean, a change in the system? Can you give us an example that either from those early days or from some of your more recent work that we could understand what that means to fix this the system?
Yeah. So going back to the Cyprus example, when we were doing work there, people would say to me who knew the conflict and the history and stuff, it had been going on for a long time. They're like, "Do you really think you can solve the Cyprus conflict?" And I said, "Yeah, give me 100 years and I'll take care of it." And our approach, believe it or not, was to stop working with the politicians and start working with children. Start working with high school students, start working with college students, and start working with teachers and journalists. Like, our epiphany was the politicians eventually will figure this out, but it doesn't matter if they figure it out if you are still teaching 5-year-olds to wave flags saying, "Kill the Turks, kill the Turks." Right? Like, so we saw the system dynamics that I have to intervene at education, at media, at youth, and prepare the next generation to do this. And so I know it's a long-term play, but like once you see the system dynamics, like you go right where you need to. That's sort of maybe a big, more dramatic example, but like in the organizational context, we did some work recently with an organization that saw they had some transparency issues. Like meaning we're not, the people are complaining, "I'm not getting enough information. We don't share enough information here. That department doesn't tell me what they're doing enough," And I've written about transparency in both of the books that we've had published in the last 5 years, and so it's an issue that I care a lot about. And I remember thinking, well, why aren't these people sharing more information? In that conversation with them, they figured out that the desire for more information, right, that was the presenting issue in the system, is like, hey, you're not sharing enough, came from the fact that in fact they had too many people involved in every decision. Right? So any decision comes along, 6 people all decide they need to be involved. And when you have 6 people involved in the decision, at least 3 of them don't have enough information. Like, that's just how that works. So their expression of "I don't have enough information," when you saw the system dynamics, actually is we involve too many people in our decisions. And so from a high level, I might look at their system and go, hey, you should share more information because people are complaining they're not getting enough. At the deeper level, you realize we need to share less information. We need to stop trying to tell everybody everything, and we need to get really clear. When it's this kind of decision, you make that you are involved. When it's that kind of decision, over here, this group is involved. And they can still share information. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but if you need to be strategic about it. And we couldn't figure that out until we saw how the different parts were all connected. So when we do work on organizational culture, it's about illuminating that stuff. Right? It's about shining a light on those dynamics that they can't see in everyday work to unlock the solution that has been there all along, basically.
So, in that example, how open are they to making such a huge system change?
Well, it varies. In this particular case, they are demonstrating so far. This is actually happening, right? Like as we speak, almost. But they're demonstrating a willingness to do the work because they also, in this particular case, were able to tie it to some of the results that the system needs to take care of. In other words, their stakeholders were telling them, "You guys are too slow. You used to generate, like you generate wonderful stuff for us, and it used to keep us ahead of the curve. These days, by the time it comes out, we're like, oh, it's a little late." And so they knew that they were slow. And so when you can tie that system dynamic to, like, all right, if we fix this, we'll be faster and we'll meet the needs of the people we're trying to serve, then that tends to get people aligned around it. If it's just sort of, you should do this because the consultant said so, then you don't get as much buy-in, which is fine, which is one reason why I don't tell them to do it. They tell themselves. But yeah, connecting it to results, and then also like breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, like there's like, okay, for this part of the work we do, we are now going to assign people decision-making roles. Someone's responsible, then they make the decision. If they're just consulted, they get to give input, but they don't get to decide. Like that kind of clarity can be broken down into like a nitty-gritty process, and people can sort of say, oh, well, I can wrap my hands around that. I can figure out how to do that piece without thinking, why aren't I involved, or what is shifting about the power? Like that might be in the back of their mind, but if they can like, oh, but I can do this, and it makes sense, and it's connected to results, you usually get people buying it. My favorite, people tell me all the time, oh, well, people resist change, and the conflict resolution field is ultimately about change. So I've been doing this for a long time. People do not just resist change; they resist doing things that they think are stupid, and they resist doing things that they think are against their own interests. Okay, right. And they definitely resist things that don't make sense. And so that's another big piece of what we end up doing, is not just saying you need to change your decision-making process, but to say, here's how we used to be, here's how it made us slow, we now want to move in this direction. And people go, oh, okay, I got it, that's true. And then they're behind it. When you just sit in a corner or sit in the corner office and decide what's best for the organization and then order people to do it, then they resist. But it's because it's not making sense to them.
Right. So I guess that's one of the reasons I'm wondering how they adjust to such a recommendation, because there are all those things that go through people's head. If I don't get enough information, how can I know that this is the right decision, and or what's that doing to is this a power grab from somebody else? All those things are going through the head.
I mean, they are. I will tell you right now, they will encounter some challenges. I'm already watching some of these evolve, which is they got clear on the concept, they got clear on how we're going to implement it, and there are a couple of bumps in the road. Like, hey, who decides who gets to be consulted and who gets to be responsible? How do we, like? Well, there's another layer to that, and so I expect them to hit bumps in the road. Part of what I think is important in that process is they've built a little bit of muscle memory now around, hey, this isn't working, we're going to shift, let's try this. And so when they hit another bump, instead of like, oh, I told you this wasn't going to work, it comes from, well, let's do that process again. Why am I upset about that, or what is the dynamic going on here? Okay, yeah, that there's a history behind that between these two departments, maybe we need to figure that out. But it just takes some of the tension out of the air when you have learned how to just say, ooh, there was a system dynamic that was getting in our way. If we can give some shape to that and understand it, then we can figure it out and move on.
Does it feel less personal to people when you find a system related issue, or does it still get feelings hurt?
Well, I mean, humans are humans, and I hate that sort of like, well, don't take it personally. I'm like, well, I'm a person, actually. So how else am I going to take it? But I get the issue of sort of, the emotional intelligence. Like your brain gets hijacked by your reaction, your personal reaction. I get that. And actually, from a conflict resolution point of view, I train people all the time in giving behavior and impact-based feedback. In other words, it's not that you are a bad employee or that you are lazy or like you don't layer that judgment in. You're just like, hey, when you engaged in this very specific behavior, it had an impact on the system or on me or the client or whatever, and that impact is not good, and so we need to adjust. You still do take that personally because you realize you did something that had a negative impact, but it's a lot easier to work through that one than the when you screwed up,
Right,
right?
right,
When the
exactly.
judgment leads, it hurts more, and that throws you off. So the system stuff does the same thing. It makes it a little more tangible. And so it's still system stuff that's like, wow, I've been leaving that other department out, hanging out on the edge for a long time. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like, so
Right.
you still deal with that, but the more you can make it like tangible and objective, the easier it is to deal with, I think.
Good, good. All right. Well, let me take a step back a little
Sure.
bit. We got on that tact because I asked you, what drove this? What was your story to get you involved in this? But I'm curious about the company you co-founded, WorkXO. And when I saw it, my first thought was hugs and kisses. So I didn't know if that was that or if it's a sports metaphor, or I'm
No,
just curious.
it's well, one is we are so excited that everyone wonders. Like we didn't really plan for that, but now we're embracing that. The original idea behind WorkXO goes back to the tagline of upgrading work. It's Work X.0, like 2.0, 3.0.
Ah, okay.
It will constantly evolve, so you don't choose one number. So it was Work X.0. Um, but I've done enough work to know that ultimately it is all about love. So I'm okay with hugs and kisses. And neither I have two business partners, Maddie and Charlie, and none of us made the immediate connection of the X's and O's on the chalkboard, the football thing,
Right, right, right.
which also makes sense. So again, you can, it's choose your own adventure here. You get to decide what it means, in my opinion. But the original intention is upgrading. We are leadership and management is being transformed right now. It's been a transformation 100 years in the making, and it's going to last a long time. And so now's the time to upgrade. So that's where that comes from.
So what does that mean to you guys then when you talk about upgrading work and it's in transition for this 100 years or whatnot?
Well, the big transition that's happening, and again, Maddie and I have identified some of this in the books that we wrote, but it is a transition from leadership and management as we practice it in organizations today was only invented 100 years ago. Like early 1900s, industrial revolution. We used to just be agricultural and
Right.
shopkeepers basically before then. And there was government and military, but that was bureaucracy. Like that's not really all of management. Management was invented when we discovered what engineering was, right? When we can take abstract thoughts and make relationships and put numbers together and create something, like that's engineering. That's what management is. And it is beautiful, and it has allowed us to create huge organizations that do amazing things and create these trillion dollar economies, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole time it ignored human beings. It ignored what it means to be human, and it put all these human beings to work doing stuff that made them feel less human. And the revolution that is happening is, and this again, we identified this early on in the book Humanize, is what if we looked at the principles that make us human and built work around that? What would it look like? And again, we identified a bunch of principles in both the two books we wrote that went into the work we're now doing around culture, because when you realize that a human workplace is actually much more about inclusion, it's much more about innovation, it's much more about agility and being able to flex and morph and grow and change. Like, we know these concepts, they're not new, and they've actually been written about in management for a long time too. Like, we're not inventing these ideas, but realizing that that's the direction we're going in a big picture, we figured then if you see that and you want to shift your organization to move in that direction, the one thing we know you'll have to do is change your culture. You can't do this by bolting on a process. Our big conclusion was like, culture is where this lives. And so we had better build a tool and a support process that allows people to do that work, because that's what's most important now. There's others, you still have to do process change, you still have to, do behavior change. Like, it's not all that, but it starts there. And so our business partner, Maddie, and I, again, have been working together before we met Charlie, but Charlie came on specifically with this idea of this culture thing is what we need to work on. And he said, I keep coming back to your books. Will you help me work on this? And so that's when we sort of joined forces to create an assessment, some real deep culture analytics, and then a program of support which lets you activate that culture and make it happen. So that's the essence now of what we do, is the analytics and then taking action to change your culture.
So can you give us some insights into what some of those, what some of the aspects of culture are that you are finding make the biggest impact in humanizing the work experience?
So it's hard for me to choose my favorite part of the culture that's working, but the pieces that tend to get more attention more quickly with folks are transparency, like the example I gave. The issue of sharing information and making information available is one that shows some really immediate impact, real immediate power, but it also makes people scared, right? Because transparency is about revealing, and it's exposure. And so they have a gut reaction to it as well. So, I'll give you a quick example just from some of the research, but one of the organizations that we studied really believes in transparency strongly, and to the point where they put their entire project management system up on the wall in the office. Now, there are only 50 people, so they can get away with this, and they work in one big room together. But basically, it means that everyone looks up on the wall and can see exactly where everyone else is on their projects and whether they're behind or ahead of schedule. So I've been there working 2 days. I get to see whether the senior manager is on top of things or not. Right? That kind of freaks people out when I tell them that story. They're like, why would I do that? The reason you do that is that when everyone can see where everyone else is, then every individual in the system has the newly found ability to make their own decision about when to stop working on what they're doing and go help somebody else. Right? Like when you make something like that visible, you enable better decision making. And they can see that instantly. They see the results of it, and they didn't need they didn't need a manager to tell them to say, "Hey, will you go help Bob? He's behind on his work." And they didn't need a boring project status update meeting, and they didn't even need email, that's why I almost want to go work at this place. It's too bad I don't know how to write software code, which is what they do. But I said, well, how do you guys communicate internally? And this is their words. They said, well, we use something we like to call high-speed voice technology.
What was that?
Yeah, they're in the room. If they say, if I say, hey, Maddie, and Maddie says, hey, Jamie, we're now having a meeting. And we are having this meeting in front of everyone else. I saw this actually happen when we were doing research there. One of the team members who does quality control for the software said, hey, XYZ team. And the whole team, which were in different parts of the room, said, hey, Mary. And she said, I just finished your quality testing. 100% of the things worked. That's impossible. What's going on? Now, she's doing this in front of everybody else. Everyone else is listening, and they're working on other stuff. And you think, well, isn't that distracting? But again, what they find is, but 2 weeks from now, that other person's going to be working on that project. And I didn't know that was going to happen yet. But in 2 weeks, that's going to happen. And the fact that they heard that conversation is going to influence their decision making. The more you make visible, the better the decisions get made. It's such a powerful and it shows up immediately in the system. The challenge for me in terms of working with organizations on this is I can tell them that story and they're like, oh yeah, well that's what they do. They're different. They're not us.
Right.
And people are reluctant to do the sharing. They're worried about what might go wrong. And it's a challenge. And so part of what we're doing with organizations in those that was the case study from the book, but when we're working with real folks on this, again, what we're trying to do is illuminate the systemic breakdowns around transparency so they can see, like the example I gave, they can see, oh, this is having an impact on what we're doing. So that makes it worth changing. And so I'm finding that if we can pinpoint those pieces, then people will make the leap. But transparency is a big one, and I'd say the other one that comes up the most is agility, right? The ability as a culture, can we see an opportunity and then shift and go towards it? And in so many organizations, it's kind of like steering the Titanic. It's like, hey, there's an opportunity over there, and you turn the wheel and you wait, and you're not turning. You're like, but I thought I turned the wheel. Like, that dynamic is huge, and being able to pull out sort of what's getting in the way is a challenge. I will also say, actually, agility and transparency tend to be linked. When I find folks that have agility issues, they often have transparency issues the other way around. So we're starting to dig into some research into that. Say, hey, if we change the transparency, would that make an impact on agility? Like, we don't have any enough data on that yet, but we're starting to collect it and look at it.
So I'd like to go back to the issue of transparency a little bit more, because one of the things that I like to talk about on the podcast is things related to employees having a voice and having that ability to speak up. So what impact do you see in employees being willing to be transparent? Do they have to have managers first that are willing to do that, or does that help set the tone, or what have you noticed in your studies and research?
Well, I mean, I do think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, like you go first. If you're transparent, then I will be. And there's also for me a root in this in the conflict resolution field, because this is primarily based in trust.
Right.
Right. And giving a voice is based in trust. Like, I create a space where you can use your voice because I trust you're not going to make things worse. And that fundamentally is where the lack of voice comes from, is a control mindset. If I can keep you from speaking, then at least I know what's going on and I have more of a control. If I let you do more, then it's out of my control, blah, blah, blah. So part of it for me in building it is not even does the supervisor support me or not? It's, can you quickly create an opportunity to experiment around that? So if I want to create a system where people have more voice, for instance, then let me create a little sandbox with some boundaries. It says within that, go for it. Have a voice. Like, that's a place to start. Because the notion of if I give up, if I enable more transparency, or if I enable more voice, I'm going to lose control. It's easier to lose control when you have some boundaries around it than if you don't. If you just say, hey, we should be more transparent. But if you're like, hey, when we're working in this context, let's actually let more people speak, or whatever it is. There was a I don't know, I just used the Titanic metaphor. I'm using another boat metaphor, but the company Gore and Associates, the folks that make Gore-Tex, right? They're well known as innovative and like an amazing company. And part of their innovation is they do experiments, which is sort of what I was just talking about. But the CEO once said, we have a rule at Gore, which is if you're going to punch holes in the boat, make sure you do it above the waterline. Right? Like, so that's a boundary issue. Like, some stuff you don't like. And I tell people on transparency, it's like, and voice, like, that doesn't mean everyone gets to say anything they want at any time. That doesn't mean you share your trade secrets. There's plenty of stuff that shouldn't be transparent. But getting clear on that, where is that water line, and where can we experiment and where can we not experiment, helps get that clear. And then the other piece around giving voice, and I saw this happen actually in the same company that I was telling you about. There's a process piece to this where I think organizations are missing opportunities to do this. When they do their performance reviews, their system is pretty simple. If you want feedback, you buy your peers lunch. Like, that's it. And because they have a pretty structured workday and they work in pairs, so they can't really do a lot of meetings. But at lunch, if you want your feedback, you invite your peers and you buy them some food, and they come in and they tell you what they think about your work. And if this is the other piece, if you want to advance in the pay scale, right? The sort of career growth. Then the organization watches to see that you invite your harshest critics to your review meeting. And I remember watching this happen. And this guy, because we were there, this is this transparent organization. So we're there doing research. We're just two strangers, right? We had never been there. And they're like, hey, this guy's having his performance review meeting. Do you want to go?
Oh my gosh.
I know. And he invited us, right? It was his decision, not somebody else's. But I'm like, okay. And so we showed up as strangers and ate the food. I felt a little guilty about that, I gotta be honest. But we ate the food and we watched the conversation. And within about 5 minutes, I could see who his harshest critic was. And at one point, he's telling a story about basically a way that he was doing the work that he knew was not going to be supported inside that culture. So he did it off like in private. Like he didn't write the code on the shared drive. He wrote it on his own hard drive, which is not what you're supposed to do. And he was telling him because he really wanted to experiment with this new approach. And he said, but I knew that wasn't how we do it here. And so I stopped and I deleted the code. And I have coder friends that when I tell that story, they're like, no, you don't delete the code. He's like, I deleted the code. And as soon as he said that, I remember his harshest critic sort of jumped in and said, I want to thank you for doing that. She said, because this is why, and I'll tell you why. The only way we're successful is if we can, when we're doing this work, is if we can map it out like 7 chess moves out. And I can't map it out if I can't see your piece. And so by putting it back on the drive or whatever, by doing it more visibly, you enabled me to do that. And that's really important. So like long story long, if you build into your process that connection I mentioned earlier, which is these behaviors actually support our success. So if you build into your process the ability to give voice and then have it work out, then suddenly people are going to support that. Suddenly people are going to be more vulnerable with each other because they've seen that it works. And so making that stuff visible and connecting it to the results is just so huge, and I don't think we do enough of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess because somebody's got to be brave enough to go first.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think in general, I look to the people who are getting paid more and have more responsibility to step up. I hate that answer almost, like I don't want it to be up to the leader. Like I'm a systems guy, right? So it should be everybody doing this. But we live in a world where we give that power to our leaders for some reason.
Yeah.
And so like I own it as a responsibility that I'm actually giving them that power. But that's what we do. So when you are given that power, you should use it responsibly, and you should take advantage of that and lead the way. So I do look to them to do that, even though I feel like it's almost unfair.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So agility was another aspect, and I kind of wanted to go back and talk about the transparency piece first. And even with the transparency piece, how much of that is a function of the size of the organization, their ability to you think of a bigger ship, it takes longer to turn a bigger ship. Can a large organization be more transparent and also be more agile?
I think it's probably easier on the transparency for the large system these days because we have technology, right? So you can actually create what we call like transparency architectures. So using technology to make sure that the information is on a shared drive, like that exists now. That didn't exist, 50 years ago. Although I keep saying that, and pretty soon that's not going to be true.
I know, right?
But anyway, that's me and my old age fear. But you can do that now. A large system can create using technology processes. I mean, there are plenty of good stories. This actually goes back to social media. The folks that use Yammer internally,
right.
Like the internal Twitter, suddenly there's a visibility to what is happening, to the relationships, to the results that didn't exist before. So there's plenty more opportunities for large systems to do that. On the agility side, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't have an answer in large systems around agility. I think there is some potential. There's one organization that we learned about in our research. I didn't do any direct research there, but they're called Morningstar, and they're a tomato processing company. And so they're not huge, like 100,000 employee huge, but thousands of employees and tons and tons of tomatoes processed. So in the article it said, if you've ever had a pizza, you've tasted their product. So like this is a big group. They've created a system where every single employee can purchase anything they need to get the job done without needing approval. You need to buy a computer
Right.
to get something done, you go do it. And people don't know how that works for that. Like people say that, well, that's just impossible. There's no way you can do it. I'm like, well, they do it. Now, one thing they did, which I don't know how they did this, is they have trained all of their employees so that every team can measure its own profitability as a team. So when you have that in the system, then people make the right decisions around the funding. But that requires a pretty radical transparency, and that requires a lack of hierarchy, that so that even seasonal employees can do this. And one thing I remember reading about in that article towards the end actually was the CEO said, I'm concerned about our ability to grow because it takes me so long to find people who get our system to hire them. I can't scale because people don't know how to work like this. And so when we did our case study research, we found all small organizations. And part of that was just because, honestly, logistically, to get in a large organization to do research, there's too many legal loopholes to, things to jump, which is fine. That's their thing. But we wanted to write the book more quickly, so we went with small groups. But I remember even at the end thinking, I think large organizations have to figure out how to be small.
Right.
I feel bad with coming up with that conclusion, but I'm wondering if that's actually kind of the future for them. Is how do you maintain the scale that they have, but suddenly enable all the little units to operate more independently? Like, I know that's a bit of a contradiction, but I'm thinking that's probably where their sort of future of work is going to end up.
Yeah.
But it hasn't obviously been the focus of our research
Gotcha.
specifically. So.
Well, you mentioned a couple of times Genome, and I read a little bit about it. So would you mind explaining what that tool is and how you guys have found it effective with the folks you?
Sure. So the workplace genome is the name we've given to our basic culture assessment. And the genome metaphor is very specifically around, what if you could see your genetic code? If you could see down to the genetic building block level, you would be able to solve problems that we currently find inaccessible, problems that seem impossible to solve when you can't see down to that level. And so our culture assessment very intentionally breaks the culture down into its most basic pieces, and it's like pulling back the surface, the layer on top, and suddenly you see all the system dynamics going on, and now you're like, oh, well, no wonder we're struggling with X, Y, or Z. And so it's the culture analytics piece of our whole culture management model, and it's a 15-minute assessment that employees take, and we get the data up in an online platform. People can see it, and it is the beginning of their journey, seeing the data like that, where they then do two other separate processes to get them to a point of having priorities around their culture, and then to writing a playbook. And so back to X's and O's. Who knew I was going to get back to that? So it was one of our clients that gave us the playbook metaphor, but it's see your culture like you've never seen it before, and it's one of the really key differences between us and what other people are doing in this space is that everyone else is telling you whether your culture is good or bad. Okay, they say, well, we've measured high performance cultures and they're up here and you're down here and here's the gap and you should address it. Or they measure whether people like the culture. Are they happy there? Are they engaged? Or is it, they say it's favorable. All of that is data. So I'm a data fan, so I love data. That's fine. But it does not get you anywhere closer to what are you going to do about it. And what we have found is that when you measure the what is, just what is, where are you on agility? Are you totally futurist or are you really traditional? I don't have a judgment about which side you should be on, but you need to know where you are. And most organizations can't name that, or probably more accurately, the senior level says what they think it is, and then there's the truth of how people experience it, and they're
Right.
so disconnected from that, and they don't have those conversations, they don't know. So this captures what is in a really nuanced and tangible, and I can get my hands around it kind of way. And once they have that, then it's like, oh, well, then what do we need to really inject into our culture to be more successful? And then how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to design some plays and we're going to run them. That part of it is really kind of straightforward, but as straightforward as it is, it's impossible without the data. It's impossible if you can't see what your culture really is.
And
So that's what it is.
so most organizations don't have the ability then, in your experience, or they come to you because they don't have the ability to try to look inside their own culture.
I'll tell you, the single unifying characteristic among all of our clients, because they're a bit all over the map in terms of size and industry and that kind of stuff. But what we've realized is that the people who most immediately see the need for this picture of what their culture is are the ones who are in a big transition. So you got a new CEO. Suddenly, nobody knows what the culture is because we have somebody new at the top.
Mm-hmm.
You are going through huge growth. Like the companies that are like, 3 years ago we were 30 people and today we're 120. Like that, those people are also like, whoa, what is our culture? We were different when we were 30. How do we need to change? People who are doing mergers and acquisitions, right? Like two companies coming together, or we just bought a new 25% of our workforce. Those moments are where when you look more deeply, you thought you knew what your culture was, but now you're looking at it and you're like, I'm not even sure I know what it is. Those are the ones that are like, whoa, if we can see these dynamics and maybe compare how our headquarters is doing with this newly acquired company that we just bought, and we can see what the difference, like, that's what I need. And so they see the value of the what is piece. It's interesting. I'll talk to two companies that are almost identical, but one of them is in a place where they feel like tomorrow's pretty much going to be like today. And I make the same pitch to them about the genome and the importance of seeing what your culture really is, and they're like, I don't get it. They're like, I don't know. It looks like interesting data, but I'm not sure that would really help us. And it's very interesting to me to hear that, because I'm like, well, I think it would help you, because if you're not changing today, you will soon.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I'm excited actually by the fact that the people who are in those transitions are the ones that see the value. And it goes back to my comment about things making sense. When you're in transition, you have to go in a new path. Like, right? The ground is no longer stable beneath your feet. You can't stay here.
Right.
Got to go somewhere else. And wherever you go, if the direction you move in is not connected to what people are already experiencing as true, they're not going to trust it. But when you move in a new direction based on, hey, this is who we are, but this is where we need to go, people go, I get that, and then they're with you. So that's the big difference.
Can you think of an example of an organization that you can share with us to illustrate this point, maybe a little more tangibly?
So we did work with one organization that had acquired a company, and it was the first one for them that was not going to be in their headquarters. So they have a headquarters, and now suddenly they have two locations. They have headquarters and new company, right? And this had already happened before the acquisition had happened before they contacted us, but they were already getting some rumblings, like something's not right here. And when they did the assessment, for them, where the biggest differences they saw were around transparency, actually, but also a marker that we call solutions, which is how customized are you? How much do you focus on the needs of the individuals in your organization? And how do you balance like internal exploration and external awareness when coming up with your solutions? Which was surprising to them that it was being experienced differently in the new company compared to headquarters. The transparency one actually wasn't as surprising to them because they're out there, they're remote, they're not here. What got interesting then when they saw the data, and those were the areas of the biggest difference, but in the conversation, they also realize that for the work they do, if you don't feel like you are part of this, you end up not producing the way they need you to produce. They had built a culture where a lot of their results were built on this really strong feeling that I am a part of this company. I am valued, I'm in. And when they saw that the other organization was feeling like I'm out, like I'm out here, I am not as connected, like that became a priority for them. And what I loved is that they got real tangible with their plays, right in the playbook. They're like, so we're going to give you more money to buy more plane tickets. Like it was that was part of it. Like if you're out there, then I want you in here more, and I'm going to go out there more. And so we're just going to raise our budgets for air travel, and we're going to visit, and we're going to make sure you're connected. And then they did some other, like they actually created a subsidy, a budget for connectivity tools. Like, and that's actually, I think, applied to some of their remote staff too. Like, if you feel like you're out there, then I'm giving you broadband that makes sure you don't feel like, oh, I don't want to get on another Skype call because the connection's not good. Nope, we're going to give you those resources. Make sure you do that. They're one of our oldest clients, and so what's exciting for me is that they're now at like a year later, and they're measuring their data again, and those numbers have gone like this.
Nice, very
like
nice.
They're aligned now. I'll probably need another year or so to try and then connect to some actual performance metrics. I'm sure they will be there, frankly, but we don't have them yet. But at least they're addressing the need, and fairly quickly, given that they only started probably the plays maybe 6 months ago.
Nice.
Which is another thing. Like people tell me forever, oh, culture change takes 8 years. Somebody told me that in a workshop once. I was like, what? How did you come up with that number? B, no, it doesn't. You can change your culture in 6 months. I've seen it happen. You just need that clarity, and you need some tangible stuff that makes it real, as well as that, long-term infrastructure that makes it permanent. But I don't think it's that hard. It may be hard work, but so is running an organization. I don't know.
Yeah. So how do you balance that though with the idea of it's going to take 100 years for Cyprus to change? Why is that so different?
Because Cyprus is hard. My God. Well, yeah. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but people died in Cyprus over that conflict. People are not dying around the acquired office not feeling part of the plan. So that's one reason why it's hard.
Right.
But the advice we give to organizations, and that we've seen really works, is the comment I just made about making it real and making it permanent. Okay, there's two pieces to the culture. Well, there's more than two, but those two pieces are really critical. When you decide to move in a new direction, you have to choose some low-hanging fruit that is also very visible. Like that idea of, I'm going to buy 3 more plane tickets next week, and suddenly I'm going to be in your office. That is a making it real culture change. That is now people are like, hey, they weren't just blowing smoke about this transparency or this connection thing. Like, they're going to do something, and it's immediate. I can do it immediately, and it's very visible. People see it.
Right.
Now, they are also going to have to do some long-term infrastructure changes. They are going to have to change the way they do performance management throughout the whole system to make sure that those behaviors that connect people who are not in the same place are the ones that get rewarded, the ones that get reinforced, the ones where the stories get repeated. That's a longer-term thing. That's the 100-year plan. And you have to be doing both simultaneously. Because if you wait and do the long-term stuff after all the short-term stuff is done, you wasted time, and now there's going to be a gap. And so you want to do both, making real, making it permanent at the same time. But you will start to see difference quicker, more quickly if you do them both at the same time.
Oh, good. I didn't know if that was really a fair question, but
No, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Good. All right. So, in this discussion that we've had, it occurs to me that you said that when you are looking at cultures, you're looking at what is, and that there's not a judgment that is assigned to that. But part of me is like, but don't certain things make more sense and have better results in an organization? How do you balance that kind of dynamic?
No, we are just actually, Maddie and I were just having a conversation with somebody about this earlier today. And the the judgment actually is important. Like there is a judgment. There's the actual the company that Maddie and I used to have before we started WorkXO was called Culture That Works. And the message behind that one is you're not just choosing a culture because it's cool or because Zappos does it or because you think foosball tables are awesome. Like you choose a culture that drives your success. You choose a culture that works for you. So there needs to be a judgment and evaluative component of this that says I am choosing to have a culture that values transparency because we get better results. The where the judgment doesn't exist is for us is that pre-baked judgment that says transparency is always better because it's not. Like we did work with a water utility company, and one of the things that we measure inside the marker of innovation is risk taking. Like the truth is you cannot be all about innovation if you don't take risks. Like that's a part of innovation is risk taking and failure and experimenting, right? When it's drinking water, I don't know that I want you taking a
Right.
lot of risks. And they scored very traditional on risk taking, and they were like, good. So you still have the evaluation, you still have the judgment. We are not a risk taking culture because we cannot afford to do that with what we're doing. But the for us that judgment piece, A, is not us. It is not the consultants judging. It is the client making a judgment about themselves. That's huge. And B, the judgment comes after you connect the dots between the what is and the what drives success.
Gotcha. Good.
I'll tell you right now what one thing that's interested me the most so far since doing this culture work is that when I turn to the client and say, all right, well, let's shift gears. We're looking at your data. We're talking about what is, which is which is interesting. They like that piece. I'm like, so let's talk a little bit about what drives your success. And I get crickets. They're like, we have to, sales drives our success and customer service maybe. And I'm like, okay, that's true for everyone. What drives your success? And this is almost like the weak link in the chain. I feel like a lot of organizations haven't really figured that out. But it's only when you figure that out that you make the more accurate judgments about what your culture should be. So the judgment happens. It just needs to happen a little bit after you see the data.
Gotcha. So, do you also help them with that piece, with the piece of what is driving your success?
We we do. I mean, it's we rely on them to do the heavy lifting, and we rely on them to do that pretty quickly because we want to get them to the action plan. But part of the analysis of the data, we give them homework basically, right? So they get their data, and before they convene for a workshop to really come up with their priorities, we give them a set of homework, and we almost slip this in. They don't even see this one coming. Like, hey, here's your data homework. So look at your data, write down your insights. Like, we want you to dig into it. It's a lot of data, so they need to dig into it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, and I got this other worksheet, and it's the, what drives your success? And those are questions like what makes you different? I've actually started asking explicitly, what are your superpowers as an organization? Those things that it's only you has this superpower, and it even has a dark side probably. But that question throws them for a loop, often, not always. And what comes out of that is, I didn't realize what made us different was X. And frequently there's a nice, well, it doesn't always work out this nicely, but often the data kind of shines a light on that power. Right? When they see the system dynamics, they're like, why do we do it this way? Like, my favorite question when I'm going through the data is, what's up with that? Right? Like, you see a couple data points, then they're like, whoa, what's up with that? Why aren't those closer together? Why aren't they farther apart? And those what's up with that questions tend to lead like, yeah, it seems really consistent. And someone's like, well, why do we do that? And it's like, well, I did that with my, client the other day and we got these results. Suddenly they're like, it's a little weird, but we do it that way apparently on purpose. So you sometimes back into your success drivers by seeing the data. Other folks are like, nope, I get it. This is what makes us win, and that's why this practice over here we can't do that anymore.
Right.
And so it goes both ways, but you need that piece, and we basically give them a launching pad for articulating it. And if they're really out of luck and they can't articulate it well, it just kind of slows their project down.
Right.
Okay. They make progress, but not as fast.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. I just have one more question as we wrap up here. What have been one or two pleasant surprises along this journey with everything that's got you to this point here, and culture and such?
I mean, and if for me, thinking back actually on the whole journey, probably the most pleasant surprise is that in doing all of this work, I feel really lucky that I was able to pull out actually a little bit of my own superpower on this, my own gift, stuff that I do that I thought everyone else did too. And that in doing this work, I got the feedback. People like, no one can do this like you can. And for me, it started in the conflict resolution field, but like being able to shine that light on the system dynamics, like that's where I go naturally. And I thought everyone did that. And it turns out that's actually something that I'm particularly really good at. And to then create a business and a way to have people pay you to do stuff that you're really awesome at, like that has been great. So it's not that it hasn't been a lot of hard work along the way, and things don't always work out, blah blah blah. But I remember actually a couple weeks ago, Maddie and I were at a conference, and there was a little exercise, and it's like, if you could do one thing inside your business that would improve things, what would it be? And I wrote down, we need to make sure we are continuously aligning what we spend our time on with what our gifts are.
Nice.
Like that's it. And you don't get 100%. Like, okay, Mike, I gotta do expense reports. That is not my gift. But the more alignment you get with that, the more sort of awesome and amazing things are. And I feel pretty lucky with the level of alignment I got going on. And actually with my two partners as well, that we support each other in that. We feel like there's a reason the three of us came together, and it's fun to be in that place.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for your time and for willing to share your insights with us. We really do appreciate it.
No, I'm happy to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.